Okay, drum roll, presentation of the budget.
Do you want us using this as our guide, or this?
Well, if you'll indulge me a few minutes, I'll start with
Preamble.
some opening
Okay.
few minutes of comments, and then Joe Fazzino is going to do the presentation. The PowerPoint presentation, which he'll be covering after my remarks, is in your packet. All of this material is being actually right now posted to the website, so everything, including the entire budget, the budget letter, and the summaries are all there now. So,
Great.
all right. So, Council, Mayor, submitted tonight for your review and consideration is the recommended 2023 budget. The proposed operating budget is $44.38 million and will require a 5.24% real property tax increase. The current inflationary environment combined with the statutory cap calculation causes this budget to exceed the state tax cap. Current inflation and forecasts for 2023 and beyond are painting a challenging financial picture. Inflation is now at a 40-year high. With year-end inflation projections reaching or exceeding 8%, the city's budget is under pressure. Although aspirational for this budget, it is not practical to limit budget growth this year to 2%. With that said, the goal of this budget is to maintain our current level of services, meet our ongoing need to invest in critical infrastructure, and to further the stated goals of the council, all the while minimizing the property tax impact on our residents. I am keenly aware of the economic concerns of our residents and believe this budget reflects a responsible approach to city operations and long-term investment. The proposed budget is a continuation of the sound planning from prior years. As part of the total overall tax increase, it does include a tax increase of 1.77% for street resurfacing and to address costs related to flood mitigation and resiliency. Finally, the budget does include some recommended use of fund balance. As in past years, this is only for capital reinvestment and does not supplement the operating budget, nor does it affect the tax rate in any way. Hitting a few highlights. 66% of the total operating budget includes salaries, wages, and benefits. Annual costs are impacted by a number of factors, including overall staffing level, contract pay increases, state-driven retiree benefits, medical insurance costs, and workers' compensation expense. For 2023, we're budgeting an increase of $1.76 million, or 6.2%, for these costs. Certain material costs have doubled in the course of the year, and the 23 budget reflects an overall increase of 17%, or $580,000. The largest driver of this increase relates to energy expenses. In February, the city borrowed $13.55 million at an all-in interest cost of a little over 3%, compared to the current estimated rate of 4.70, and an estimated savings to the city of over $250,000 a year. As described during the August capital projects presentation, the bond proceeds are a critical funding component of the overall infrastructure plan. The 23 proposed budget reflects an increase of $120,000 in legal expenses. This is reflective of ongoing legal matters across city departments, city council initiatives, as well as the contemplated union contract negotiations. The Portchester-Rye-Rybrook EMS contracts with the three communities to provide critical EMS response. The city's contribution for 2023 totals $350,000, or approximately $75 per household. This is an increase of $75,000 over 2022 and reflects both inflationary impacts as well as increased staffing and supervision. The Wright Free Reading Room has requested $1.36 million for 2023, an increase of $25,000 or 1.8% over 2022. The Wright Youth Council has requested an increase of $5,000, and both of these are reflected fully in the budget. Significant non-property tax revenues are an important component of our budget. Sales tax, mortgage recording tax, and building permits reflect a total of $7.2 million, or 16% of the total operating budget. Over the past 6 years, the city has benefited from increasing revenues reflective of low inflation and a growing economy. With the accelerating inflationary environment and resulting economic slowdown, we must assume some reductions in these revenues for 2023. Sales tax alone represents 8.5% of total revenues. For the 23 budget, we're projecting a slight decline in sales tax revenues versus projected 22 receipts. The mortgage recording tax is almost 4% of total revenues. Over the last 5 years, mortgage taxes annually have totaled between $1.5 and $2.5 million. With mortgage rates now at a 20-year high, we're projecting lower mortgage activity and a revenue decline of 30% for 2023. Building permit revenue for this year is expected to total $1.8 million. Similar to sales tax and mortgage tax, we are assuming that there will be a slowing of new building activity and are assuming a reduction of 8% for 2023. The bright spot is interest income. Interest income results from the various city funds that are invested in the course of the year per the city investment policy. As a result of Federal Reserve action since May, short-term interest rates have now risen over 3.5%. This dramatic increase, coupled with the significant additional monies now being invested in anticipation of our capital program, provides significantly greater assumed interest income for next year. For this budget, we're assuming interest income of $800,000 for 2022 or 23 versus the $50,000 year to date in 2022. With this proposed budget, I'm recommending that a portion of the excess unassigned general fund monies be utilized for certain long-term investments, as well as to replenish the contingency reserve fund. Based upon the city's general fund policy established by this council several years ago of maintaining a reserve equal to 10% of projected expenses, we are projecting a $2.6 million surplus in fund balance this year. The allocation of that money I'm recommending as follows. By council action earlier this year, $600,000 from the 2021 surplus money was transferred for the purchase of new communication systems for the police department. This is the first system replacement in almost 20 years and is required for all police operations as well as coordination and communication with surrounding municipalities. Unfortunately, the cost estimates provided early this year by vendors and the system sponsor fell well short of the actual cost. With this budget, I'm requesting an additional $225,000 from the projected 22 surplus to complete the new system acquisition. Second, in 2022, this council established this city established its first fleet management plan in its history. Through that plan, we determined that the annual cost of replacing city vehicles totals approximately $1.2 million a year. The 22 budget included $400,000 in a tax rate for fleet investment, as well as a one-time use of fund balance. At the time, I noted that this amount was only the first step and there would be additional financial needs. In this budget, I'm recommending an additional $400,000 in excess fund balance be allocated for vehicles in the 23 budget. In future budgets, I'll be recommending additional money that should be, if possible, included in the actual tax rate. In recent years, the financial performance of the city has allowed us to increase the capital projects fund in anticipation of the significant infrastructure investment, some of that actually coming tonight. In the year end last year, the capital projects fund totaled a little over $7 million. As part of this budget and in keeping with the previous council policy, I'm recommending that $1.65 million of this year's surplus be allocated to the capital projects fund. In total, we expect the fund balance beginning of next year to exceed $9.3 million. In the aftermath of Ida, this council has invested a significant amount of money and time on the issue of flooding. In 2022, the city spent approximately $450,000 on engineering studies and financial consultants related to the Blind Brook watershed and other flooding. In addition, the city has spent an estimated $150,000 in engineering design and work to alleviate localized flooding caused by aging stormwater infrastructure. This is likely to be only the beginning of a larger, significant, and longer-term investment in flood mitigation and resiliency. In this budget, I'm proposing that $250,000 be added to the tax rate to be dedicated to flood mitigation and resiliency. This initial funding will be partially used to fund the annual cost of data collection and the maintenance of the stream gauges on the Blind Brook over the next 3 to 5 years. Since 2018, the city has spent over $9 million on resurfacing of city roads and has now paved in excess of 34 lane miles. In recognition of the ongoing need, I am proposing an additional $250,000 to be added to the tax levy. This amount, combined with the existing $600,000 in the levy and the estimated $100,000 in annual street opening permits, assures that the minimum annual investment each year will be just short of $1 million. For 2023, through a combination of existing proposed tax rate monies, existing and proposed, permit revenues, and other funds, I'm proposing a total of $1.9 million to be allocated for city roads and parking lots, likely to include Purchase Street and Ryrex parking lot. And then finally, sewer maintenance. The annual cost citywide of our sewer maintenance program totals approximately $500,000. In addition, as required by the terms of the settlement and stipulated order with Save the Sound, we are investing in an additional $150,000 annually in various sewage repairs and improvements. This amount does not include the significant and ongoing capital investment related to our overall sewer system. In terms of the two enterprise funds, for the boat basin, revenues for 2023 are forecasted to be a little over $900,000 with a budget expense of $715,000. For 2023 year-end, the boat basin will have an estimated unrestricted net assets of $3.3 million, which is expected to be used significantly to fund the boat basin dredge in fall of next year. For the golf club, revenues are forecasted to be $5.5 million this year with budgeted expenses of $5.4 million. For 23, the golf club is estimated to have unrestricted net assets of $3.8 million. In approaching 2023, the current economic environment and inflationary pressures cause me to be even more mindful and deliberate in how we allocate our valuable resources. This proposed budget is a continuation of prudent and thoughtful budgeting that began 3 years ago. It is also reflective of the renewed attention to flooding and emergency preparedness. During the pandemic, the city administration remained focused on the dynamic financial impacts and made timely and necessary adjustments when necessary. This active management proved to be critical over the last 3 years and will continue in 2023. We do not take the financial responsibility entrusted in us lightly. By the city charter, it's the obligation of the city manager to submit this budget to the council for your consideration each year. However, this budget, like all operations of the city, is the result of the collective work of each department head. My thanks to each for their work this year and for the conscientious work every day. As always, Joe Fazzino and his staff have done the heavy lifting to produce this budget and financial plan.
Thank you, Greg. How's everybody doing tonight?
Hey, Joe.
So I'm going to visualize a lot of what Greg just said, so we'll kind of go through some of these slides and focus on the general fund. This is my 11th budget overall, and obviously, as I said at the last meeting, it was a different process than usual. So here we go. So this page, this first slide, I'm sorry.
It's also in your packet.
You have a copy of the slideshow.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So this first slide is located on page 3-3 of your budget document.
This one, second part.
Yes.
So overall, general fund expenditures are $48,087,000, and those are offset by revenues other than property taxes of $15,284,000, appropriated fund balance of $3.1 million, and the way to balance the budget obviously is through the property tax levy. The property tax levy for 2023 is $29,700,818. It's based on an assessed valuation of $147,873,000, which translates to a 200.85 tax rate per thousand of assessed valuation. Focus to the next slide. The overall property tax levy increase is a $2,508,664 over last year. Tax rate increase, as Greg said earlier, of 5.24%. And here, in line with prior year budgets, the property tax levy for 2023 is 2/3 of our total revenues overall. With respect to the property cap, as Greg had mentioned earlier, this property tax increase leaves the city over the cap by $1,572,133. We could spend a few extra minutes on this slide, as it's been a while since we've actually been over the tax cap. When I logged onto the state website, I got a warning sign that I exceeded the property tax cap, so I thought it was important to maybe take a few seconds and go through that. The last comptroller used to give a 20-minute tax cap presentation. I'm not going to do that tonight. Everybody's eyes kind of glazed over after about 30 seconds, so let me just kind of walk you through this a little bit. Total tax levy down below, it doesn't just include the property tax levy, it also includes any special districts, which we have in terms of the Kirby Lane sewer districts. We have an Upper Dogwood Lane sewer district, and also a pilot payment through Thiel Road every year. So we were allowed an increase of $948,000 and $696 overall. And again, we had a $17,000 increase, allowance for last year that we carried over because we were under the cap by that much last year. As earlier Greg mentioned about the tax cap is 2% or the rate of inflation whenever it's lower, and obviously in this case 2% is much lower than the actual rate of inflation. There's also a tax-based growth factor of 1.38% that allows us to raise the taxes a little bit more.
Joe, I'm sorry, can
Yes.
I ask a question?
Sure.
Inflation as of what date and by what measure?
I think they use basically at this point of the year the New York State inflation factor.
Like they publish something that's their inflation factor?
Yes.
The state does
Yes.
that?
Yeah, I believe it's 715, 720 is the published inflation factor for the state right now.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Because like the national average is higher, right, or something?
But
It's
that,
like
that's
over
it's solely published. I mean, I can't say so. It's used specifically for the calculation of the tax
Okay.
cap. So
Correct.
there is a published amount each year for that purpose.
Thank you.
So that was interesting, not interesting, but important to show this slide. Next one is kind of how we arrived at the property tax levy increase. As you see here, operating expenses overall are up $3.6 million, so there's an increase of the levy there. We had revenues other than property tax levy increase by about $1 million, a little over $1 million. And then we dropped the amount of property taxes to fund capital expenditures by $100,000. And again, property taxes to fund vehicle equipment replacement is flat for this year, but it is $400,000 included in the tax rate, which leads to the overall property increase that I mentioned earlier. Important to note, revenues other than property tax levy, obviously, as Greg mentioned earlier, sales tax, building permits, mortgage tax, interest income. And included in property taxes to fund capital expenditures are for the streets, resurfacing, flood mitigation, and sewer. So, as I've done in years past, before we get to 23, I kind of like to see where we finished up 22. Greg mentioned the surplus, and obviously, as in years past, it's a combination of expenditures coming in under budget and revenues coming in over budget. So again, it tracks this year once again. So we'll focus on the expenditures versus budget first, and then we'll jump into the revenues. Excluding recreation, which will be down at the bottom, salaries are expected to be down citywide about $852,000, mostly due to vacancies across numerous departments throughout the course of the year, additional resignations, retirements, creating positions that remained unfilled, resulting in these savings. Most of these positions that we'll see later on are expected to be filled by the end of the year. Some of these positions were vacated much longer than initially thought, so we had some additional savings that we didn't think we'd have when we gave you the second and third quarter presentations. Biggest number, obviously, due to inflation is electricity and gasoline costs, and combined those are up over about $230,000. Another big number that comes up is consultants. This is actually attributed to consultant work for grants in cybersecurity that we actually encumbered in 22, so it wasn't part of your 22 budget. It was actually encumbered at the end of 21, I'm sorry. Miscellaneous contracts are across various departments. And then getting down to the benefits and taxes. The 2022 budget included a conservative estimate of 10% for increased employee and retiree health costs. The 22 premium rates for employees actually increased by 13% compared to the 21 rates. The vacant positions that I mentioned above kind of offset that 3% pretty much for the savings there. So the insurance wasn't being paid because we didn't have the employees to pay it. 2022 premium rates for retirees were actually flat compared to the 21 rates, resulting in savings there as well. The 2022 budget, we conservatively called for a 10% increase in workers' compensation over the 21 premium. And again, happy to say, for the fourth straight year, the city's experience rating has gone down. It's actually about 1, which is very good. The 2022 premium came in 12% less than the 2021 premium, resulting in over a 20% savings versus budget this year. And the one knock, unfortunately, on recreation net costs came in a little higher than expected, and that was basically due to the recreation department not getting the full revenues that they anticipated for day camp.
Joe, before we turn the page on,
Sure.
on consultants, you didn't mention the consultants that we've hired with respect to flooding.
Yes.
And that approaches $500,000 in itself.
Yes. So as we mentioned at the last meeting, the money that came out for consultants is in the capital funds line. It's not in the general fund. $350 was appropriated for Ramble from the general fund, from the CapEx reserve fund, and as Greg mentioned, another $150 on consultants throughout the course of the year.
Yeah, 100 came from contingency.
DCMC.
Contingency for DCMC.
Yes.
Right. So that's not included in the general fund.
So the increase doesn't include the flooding consultants?
Right.
Here, that we're
The
looking
year
at
to
right
year
now.
over it, no, it does not include it.
Okay, and it's up $358,000
Right.
over what the budget was. And the reason for that again?
Again, it was items that we had encumbered at the end of 21. It rolled into 2022. So the expense shows in 22, but the actual money was reserved in 21. So it's basically bookkeeping. I wanted to point that out. That it wasn't
Timing
a huge
difference.
I'm sorry?
Timing difference.
Yes, that's correct. You would have saw it at the balance sheet at the end of 2021. You would have saw that number sitting out there, reserved for this year. Any other questions on expenditures? Okay. So revenues again outperformed budget. Typical, suspects start with sales tax coming in $400,000 over budget for this year. It's up about 13% for the first 3 quarters. We're being cautious with our estimate for the fourth quarter, but we're still showing, obviously, over budget of about $400,000. We'll talk about later where we are in terms of budget versus budget, as Greg mentioned. Cost of providing goods and services increasing due to inflation. I feel like we still haven't seen that normal year yet. We've had a COVID year. We've had supply chain issues. We haven't had a normal year just yet, so still kind of being optimistic but cautious on the sales tax number. Another big one here is penalties and interest. Concerted effort by the finance department and Kristen, especially Vinny in my office, to collect against delinquent properties that were outstanding for a couple of years now and that were affecting our balance sheet. We wanted to clear that up. So you see a large increase in the penalties and interest collected on property taxes. So kudos to everybody.
Is that because of the commuter parking thing where you're requiring people to pay their...
No. This were a list of foreclosures.
Oh, okay.
So this doesn't represent
This is property taxes, yeah.
itself,
property
but actually
tax.
penalties and the interest.
Okay.
I believe we did put something threatening in the renewals for anybody with delinquent parking tickets.
Yes, I did.
Yes. Okay. We're seeing, as Greg had mentioned, interest income is going to be the largest factor in the other revenues, revenues other than property taxes. We've seen the interest rates go up about 375 basis points since May 1st. So we are projecting interest income of $110,000 over budget for this year. And as you'll see in a few minutes, we will show how we did that to offset the property taxes and increased expenditures for 2023. We have our full year's worth of mortgage tax, which actually runs from October through September. We are projecting an increase over budget of $770,000. Again, this was basically taking advantage of historic interest rates and increasing the housing market. So we don't expect that level next year. get to that in a minute. And last but not least, FEMA reimbursement for Isaias and Ida of $1,035,000. We expect that by year end. Again, we didn't budget for that, and expenses were absorbed last year during these storms, mostly overtime, use of equipment, and basically those are the two largest damages that we are getting repayment for.
And will that be full reimbursement for those storms, or do we have other claims pending?
These are the claims that we have that they have basically given the green light on, that they've gotten all the information from us and they are ready to move forward on. Some of them we've actually received about half so far, but the other ones are basically signed off on.
There are, Mayor, there are a handful of claims that we're still working through. I mean,
Yeah.
it won't be another $1 million, but we're still pursuing 2 or 3 other items.
Okay.
Yeah. Anything else on 22 results?
Well, you didn't talk about the filming permit revenue, which
No, I
is the
did
most
not.
exciting line on there.
$62,000, a couple of... care to elaborate on those or no?
Yeah, we had a big year. You never know when they're going to come in. If
Yeah.
anyone's watched The Watcher this year, season 1.
That story, actually, my friend lives on the street that
See?
actual house is on. That's a
Creepy.
crazy story. Do you
Yeah.
guys know the story?
Yeah, I mean-
it's insane.
So we worked really hard to make sure that the city was, and made whole, and all of the inconveniences that happened and all of the overtime, everything was taken care of. So we had a good year.
Exciting.
Hollywood of the East,
We're
right here. Look
famous.
at that.
That and no crime and ride, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Okay, next up is unassigned fund balance, just a chart showing the trends from basically the recession back in 2008 through the current day. You can see fund balance begin to climb back over 10% as the recession started to end, but at the expense of capital projects. So you saw that number kind of climb, but we kind of were just holding on to our money at that point. And as you see, the last 5 years since the city has adopted the capital fund 10% policy, we've been keeping that number right around 10%. The city has tried to remain close to that number while using any excess into the capital reserve fund or any other capital projects. That's why it was created in 2019, and we've been doing a good job at staying at 10%. And as Greg mentioned, that fund has exceeded $9 million.
So if I can just to give one piece of color, if you take, for example, 2013 and the bar there of fund balance, that included all city assets, all city, that was the equivalent of the CapEx fund and the general fund reserve at the time. That was all in one place because it was just simply in the general fund,
Okay.
right? If you did that today, the bar would be at 30%. Because we have almost a $9 million, over $9 million CapEx reserve, which is in and of itself 20% of annual expenses. Now we're going to be spending that, or the council is going to be spending that on projects. But my point is that that would be the comparative of prior years in terms of city resources available now.
You need a nice big footnote here.
Yeah.
And so going forward, I mean, the goal, the green, we should be around 10%.
That was the general fund. That's the policy that the council established
Right.
4 years ago,
Yeah,
I
I
believe,
remember.
something like that, and that we would flow all excess monies in a given year that weren't otherwise being used into CapEx, which is how you've now accumulated a $9 million fund there.
And that 10%, I mean, I remember this conversation, but we were like, it's ratings and.
It's the general guidance by the rating agencies of prudent. It's one of many factors that goes into your rating, goes into a municipality's rating, but it's appropriate given the city operations, given all aspects that 10% is a prudent
Good number.
And obviously, rating agencies are also looking at our capital too when they're looking at our fund balance overall and giving us a
Right.
rating that we do have this money for projects set aside as well.
Great.
This is the history of the change in the tax rate since the recession. Only 4 years above 3% since 2011. 2017, the city added the $600,000 that we spoke of earlier to the property tax rate, which put us over the cap, but it was intentional, it was prudent, it was the right thing to do. And as you can see, the other spike was in 21 when we had a lot of uncertainty given COVID on our other revenues besides property taxes. So we kind of budgeted very conservatively on that number. And of course, you see the correction in 22, the number dips back down to kind of where it had been.
Just for clarity, this is the city's portion of a homeowner's tax bill, right?
Correct.
It's not 5% of a homeowner's total tax bill. It's just the city's portion of that, 16% of the...
Right, 17% of the total. And we'll
Right.
get into exactly what that means to the
Okay.
average homeowner later in the
Okay,
book.
great.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, moving on to 2023. As we talked about a little earlier, operating expenditures of $44,387,000, or $3.7 million over the originally budgeted 2022 expenditures. And I'll just go through some of the larger items. Obviously, Greg talked earlier. Largest component of the increase is employee salaries, $923,000. Basically a result of contracted salary and step increases for 23, as all union contracts are settled. This is the last year of the budget certainty, as all contracts expire at the end of 23.
We just did this.
No,
Feels
we
like
did
we
it
just
5
did
years
this.
ago.
Yeah.
I know, but it feels
Time
like
flies.
we just did this. Now we have to do it all over again. All right.
I enjoyed the last 3 years. Biggest item concerning inflation, obviously, is $253,000 increase in electricity and fuel. Public Works did a pretty in-depth analysis of the gas over the last year. While we didn't take the highest price, we did budget conservatively on a number to get to this large increase here. $135,000 consultants is money that we are putting into IT and cybersecurity, and we had reduced we had a second position budgeted in 2022 for the IT department. We've removed that position and included it and moved the money into consultants. So it's basically a wash there. Again, we're always conservative on our health insurance budget, so we budgeted a 10% health insurance increase for both retiree and employee insurance. So that is the increase of, as you see, of close to $580,000 in total. New York State retirement system rates are still a little over 2%, coupled with the increased salaries have led to the increase of about $360,000. And the lone wolf down there at the bottom, workers' compensation, down is the only one that's actually decreased. We have a decrease of $126,000. Even with a 10% budgeted increase for 23, we're going based on the premium that, again, we saw 12% less than the year before.
Why is that going down?
Just knock on wood, had a lot of big cases. Good training for the DPW employees, especially. Haven't seen a lot of, big issues. So,
Have the rates gone down generally? Or?
They've been going down for 4 years now. So, we're right on par with where we should be. We don't have that number yet. That usually comes out by the end of this month, unfortunately. So if anything obviously changes dramatically, we'll let you know and go before the public hearing. A couple of graphs on expenditures. Again, this is expenditures by group, and in total, salaries and benefits, obviously the highest contributors, 63% overall of your total budget. Next slide shows just different functions, public safety, which includes not only police and fire, but also the building department, and your EMS. That is the largest component here of 30%. Everybody's favorite page, full-time positions, showing authorized positions of 163 in 2022. As of November 1st, we're down 11 positions. Many of those are expected to be filled by either at the end of this year or early next. You have 3 positions in the golf club, so overall it's 8 positions for the general fund, but citywide it was 11. And this is just a history of the medical expenses since 2008. Again, you saw large increases during the recession, kind of flattens out there in the middle, and then you see the large drop in 2019 due to the city moving every employee to night shift. So there was substantial savings there during its first year. And again, due to COVID, due to the state of the economy, you're seeing these large spikes going forward. Next slide is retirement expense. Again, we had double-digit rate increases by New York State retirement from 2009 to 2013. Kind of leveled off once we came out of the recession. We saw a large spike in 2021 due to COVID. Levels off and actually dipped a little bit for 22. And again, we're just assuming we've gotten the rates for 23 from New York State retirement. But again, it's important to note that this is for active employees only, not retirees, and it's obviously governed by New York State. It's based on an actuary study that they have conducted, takes into account interest rates and such. So we're not really sure what that number is going to look like in 2024. It comes out in the fall, so we won't know until then. Any questions on expenditures for 23? Okay. So these are revenues other than property taxes. As Greg mentioned earlier, just being cautious in terms of a possible economic slowdown. We're keeping sales tax flat. I think mortgage tax speaks for itself, as we've spoken earlier. Fortunately, mortgage tax has been an item we have always budgeted conservatively because you just never know year to year. Not only is it interest rates, but some years it's sales. Residents in some years pay cash only, so there is no mortgage. So we've always been cautious on our budget for mortgage tax. So again, fortunately for us here, we feel comfortable with that $1,750,000 as it takes into account the last pretty much 13 years average, and we're right there. Building permits, again, due to interest rates and possibly just economic slowdown, we actually dipped that $150,000 or about 8%. Interest income, once again, is a factor in other non-property tax revenues, up $750,000. And fire inspection fees due to increased inspections in 23. Parking meter revenues mostly attributed, I would say, to the longer hours from, I believe it's till 9 o'clock now?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
So sales tax, if we had like a normal year with the new sales tax, because we changed the way sales tax got distributed, right?
It was an additional 1% they gave us back in 2019. We went from
Right.
7 3/8 to 8 3/8.
Because traditionally, have we seen does it follow sort of the retail model in terms of the fourth quarter being higher?
It usually is. That is our highest volume. We're keeping it flat just comparatively. We're being, well, not flat, but we are saying we're going to be 400,000 over compared to where we are right now.
Okay.
This year would have been the only regular
Normal.
year,
Yeah.
normal
Right.
year since the change.
And then the economy's in
And then we just don't know what, from an economic growth standpoint. This is frankly one of the hardest parts of the budget, is just projecting what non-property tax revenues are going to be, because
Yeah.
particularly when we have a transition period like we're having right now, or like we had during COVID.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're hoping for some normalcy at some point, just have not seen it yet.
Got it.
Again, these are just your revenues other than property taxes, and the same contributors. Largest one, obviously, sales tax. You have your building permits, mortgage tax. And making its way back onto the chart is interest income at the end there. Another strong non-property tax revenue for 2023. These revenues make up about 29% of all revenues. These items here, last year was 30%. So in the ballpark, it's been consistently over 25% over the last years. This is the recent years, I would say. It's been at least 25%. Greg mentioned earlier significant capital spending from surplus and the tax rate. $1.9 million street resurfacing, has $850,000 through the tax rate, $950,000 from state aid, and $100,000 from surcharges on the city street opening permits. $1,650,000 transferred to the general capital projects account, which puts that balance at about $9.4 million at the end of 23 after these transfers in. Again, in the tax rate, $250,000 for flood mitigation resiliency, $150,000 for annual sewer maintenance, and on the city vehicle replacement program side, we have $800,000 in total, $400,000 from property taxes, and $400,000 from the surplus mentioned earlier. Any questions before I move on to some other charts? answer Councilman Henderson's question before about your average tax bill and how your dollars are distributed. We've done this pie chart here. Average tax bill on a $1.7 million home is a little over $27,000. Lion's share going to the Rye City School District of almost $17,000, or 62%. 20%, or almost $5,500 going to the county. 17% to the city of Rye, $4,743.
So our proposed 5.24% increase.
So again, if you
17% is an increase on 17% of that
It's down,
overall.
but no, it's on that tax bill. It'd be about a $250 tax increase this year.
As a percentage.
That's 5.24% of the city's 17% of the total tax bill.
Okay, all right.
included in your tax rate increase is the library, but we've broken it out here just to show, separate it out.
So it doesn't get distributed through everybody else? Like if we're collecting more in taxes, so isn't that then distributed to all of these pieces of the pie?
No, every jurisdiction has.
They have their own tax rate.
Their own tax rate.
So does this pie chart include their increases
No,
for next year?
This is based on their current taxes right now.
Okay, all right.
So this is our current year, our next year, but their current year.
The
Okay.
school budget gets passed in June. It's a different schedule. So.
The county will be done now, city. Most villages and towns don't get done until, not that it impacts this, but in terms of the budget cycle, villages and towns are on a fiscal year.
Yeah.
This is just a comparison of other towns versus the city of Rye. Again, this is our 23 rate versus their 22 rates, so they have yet to have the fun with inflation that we have had in our budget this year, so we can expect those numbers to possibly go up for next year. We don't know those rates until, again, early part of next year in some cases. Our last slide is just kind of a summary of what I've talked about. Tax rate increase of 5.24%, 1.77% for street resurfacing and flood mitigation resiliency, increase overall of $248 or $21 per month for the average home. Tax levy increase is $1,572,000 over the New York State tax cap. 3.1 of general fund unassigned fund balance to fund capital expenditures, vehicle purchases, police radio system, contingency cost, all non-operating expenditures. And again, $1.9 million in proposed budget for street resurfacing. And just some key dates for the rest of the budget cycle. November 14th, we have our first budget work session, which includes the Rye Free Reading Room, Rye Recreation, Police and Fire Departments. November 16th, next Wednesday, the budget work session for Public Works, the Boat Basin, and the Golf Club. December 7th, the first Wednesday in December, is the public hearing on the budget, and hopefully on December 21st, City Council meeting where the 23 budget will be passed.
What time are those meetings at?
6:30.
I think we had tentatively set 6:30, but obviously subject to the mayor and others.
6:30, unless people have a problem with that.
Obviously, I can answer your questions now. I can answer your questions during the work session. Best way, if you want some more in-depth answers, if you can get me your questions prior to these work sessions, that would be appreciated, either phone call or email. You guys all know how to get in touch with me, so whatever you
Joe,
want.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you,
Thank
Joe.
you.
Yeah, Joe,
Thanks, Joe.
you're
You're welcome.
awesome.
I find it interesting. I mean, I know we should hear about it, but within our budget work, we're talking about the Boat Basin and Golf Club that operate their own independent budgets that don't really impact us.
That's correct. Yeah.
It's just like a reference point to say, hey, well, this is what we're doing, but it has no impact on our larger budget.
The only impact is the interfund transfer.
Mm-hmm.
But
Sure.
otherwise, there's no. You're correct. It's not accumulating.
I mean, we have oversight over it, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We do from a personnel, civil service, procurement, et cetera. But it is the commission's budgets in terms of they set their rates and charges. It comes to you for approval.
Right.
Right.
That's it.
But it's their budget.
So When did we talk about this, though?
On Monday and Wednesday of
and
next
Wednesday,
week.
and the next.
Yeah, well, I'm just looking at the calendar for that, and it's segmented by particular departments,
Right.
and we may need time for, let's call them overall generic questions, which people are going to have after they review this presentation and the materials.
Yeah, you'll have, which we can do, informally. You also have the council meeting.
We have a public hearing, right? We
Before,
need to set it up.
before you open the public hearing to do that
Yeah,
as
'cause
well.
That's the 30th.
Because we just got to be sensitive to the fact that once it goes public, there can't be like substantive changes, right? Those have to get in ahead of time.
No, you can make substantive changes afterwards. It's just a supermajority as opposed to a simple majority to make those
Right.
amendments.
Right. So there is a difference. So I'm struggling with Greg, you know this, struggling with this high of a tax rate increase. And I'm
As am I.
not just
So, do you think it would be wise to set the public hearing for the November 30th, as opposed to the December 7th?
You can't do it by charter in November. You have to have
Okay.
it in December.
All right, then that
Well, I
ties our hands. We can't.
But I think your concern is not having the time for us to.
No, it's not even time. It's just the discussion is.
Time to have
I
people
agree with
comment.
I agree with the logic in this that there are these costs that we're going to be incurring and do incur on an annual basis, and therefore it should be built into the tax situation. We're doing all of it now in this proposal, and my concern is people are feeling it from a bunch of different places right now, and I wonder if we could say, all right, this year we're going to do like, I 100% agree, like the flood stuff, but maybe the road resurfacing, we've been handling that. Maybe we push that out from a tax perspective. It doesn't mean we're not going to still do it. We do.
No, I totally agree on the roads. That is, we're seeing a road report that shows us needing X dollars to maintain our forward motion that is much lower than what we've been spending. And we have been able to actually achieve a much higher road bogey over the past years, finding funds, either state aid or street opening permits or whatever, to help us get to that goal. And there is a certain amount already in the tax rate. And with respect to flooding, we know we have to make these expenditures. We have the Capital Reserve Fund, which we'll be spending down. I think we should only be baking into the tax rate permanently monies that we need for expenditures that we fully understand and that are going to be recurring beyond the next couple of years. So, for instance, the data collection with respect to Boven Dam will go on for a few years, but I think we've all challenged the $150,000 a year that data collection is supposedly going to cost. And I think we really have to probe what the expenditures would be before we make things a permanent part of our tax rate.
Or even, and maybe stage it over time, right? Like building some in this year, builds some more in next year or something if we have to do it, rather than like a big bang approach where I'm just sensitive to the fact that everybody's sensitive right now. I mean, in the industry I'm in, layoffs are crazy. It just, yes, it's whatever it is, $300 per household on an average basis, but there are people,
$250.
Yeah, but
So each percentage point is $50.
the example that was given was on a $1.7 million house. It's about $258,
Yeah.
whatever it is, right? So I'm just saying,
Greg, are we doing anything in this budget that's different from other budgets in the last year and the year before?
Well, the two. Let me put it this way: if you if you do not allocate any tax rate dollars for flooding, and you allocate no additional tax rate dollars for, for roads, you're at a 3.5% tax rate increase. So the only two things that are additive to that is an allocation of $250,000 for ongoing flood projects to be determined. Consultants, stream gauge, whatever the case may be. And then the other is, as I said, for roads, where we'll see in the resurfacing report tonight that the city's path for road replacement resurfacing needs to be between $800,000 and $1 million a year.
Those are
the only two add-ons.
Those are the only two.
The otherwise,
Change.
this is an operating budget with a tax increase of 3.5% that simply reflects the cost of goods and services and personnel.
Okay.
There was, and then, to Julie's point, there was some thinking, or my thinking was originally to try to add money to the tax rate for vehicles for this year, because we know by definition we're incurring $1.2 million in annual cost for vehicles. And instead of putting that in the tax rate for this year, I'm recommending we take it out of excess fund balance.
So
Which
this $800,000 for vehicles is the same that we did this year.
It's an additional $400,000. The council put $400,000 in the tax rate last year for vehicles.
Okay.
I'm recommending another $400,000 this year, but not in the tax rate, out of fund balance. And so that still gets us to closer to what we need to be spending on vehicles, or we are spending on vehicles. It just doesn't affect the tax rate. It doesn't affect the tax rate in this year.
Yeah.
Have we seen a proposed county budget? Do we have a sense of what they're at?
We don't get that till early next year, unfortunately.
Oh, really?
I haven't seen anything yet.
It's not the same budget period.
It is, but it's collected in May. So it is.
Well, no, in terms of the county executive's budget itself, not the revenues. I don't know when. I don't know.
I was just curious. I mean, to Julie's point about people being hit, this pie chart is looking at our percent only this year, right? We're not seeing the full pie because we don't know what the school, of course, because it's a different timeline. So if we had a proposed 3.5% increase, which is what you said we would be looking at if we didn't add the flooding and the roads, I'm sorry, then is that $148 per $1.7 million household?
It'd be closer. Yeah, it'd be under 200 for sure. I don't know the number.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think back to 2017, 2018, when we started really looking at the roads again, and we got ourselves into that situation because we weren't.
But let's look at the roads report. We're going to get a roads report from Ryan, which is,
I'm
going to
hoping
show.
to see the roads report, but I think in terms of flood mitigation, we know this is happening. The gauges are going to be installed in January, and we need to start collecting that data as soon as possible. And I agree, it may not be $250,000, but we're already done with Ramble. We've already paid them, and that's it. There's going to be a need for another consultant or another study or something coming down the pike. So I feel comfortable having that cushion there. So we're not grabbing for the walls if something happens.
Right. I think, and just so I understand what Josh's concern is versus yours, Carolina, which I agree with your perspective. Your point is that if we add this percent into the budget, we're adding it into the tax cap. So every year we would have
Into the tax rate.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. But so Carolina's point is that she's not worried about us spending it with the stream gauges and the data collection, and then on a going forward basis, there will consistently be issues that we're facing that would.
Yeah, I mean, it could be street flooding.
And my point is that we can find that money elsewhere. That is, it becomes a management issue. But we've done a great job in putting together a capital reserve fund of $9 million. We're going to spend it down, but we're also going to be rebuilding it.
And I guess my point is, let's
we
say we
sharpen
think
the
that these are
pencil then?
all worthy and appropriate to be built into the tax rate.
But I think
my-
the flooding.
And so I'm just finishing my point, that I think there is also a discussion to be had about what do we prioritize to do now? Do we have to big bang it and make it, as impactful this year? Or could we say, all right, we're going to go 3.5% this year and 3.5% next year, and it gets covered, some of this gets covered next year, so it's not just one punch now. And I would agree, like some of, we should be thoughtful. The stuff we're building in should be things that will a service or a need that we will have to undertake on behalf of the city for a very long time, right? To be codifying it in the tax rate.
And that will be because it's monitoring first, and then it's
Right, so we
designing
can
the
debate
algorithm.
which of
and
those
then
things
it's-
there, and I'm not going to disagree with you. I do think, I still question the exorbitant price tag that they put out there for the monitoring, but regardless, I agree that is probably something we would want to do this year. But then I'm saying, okay, then maybe the roads thing, which we've been overspending to catch up, and now we're getting to a better place with roads. Maybe if we want to build that in, maybe we do that one next year. So it's not. Do you know what I mean? It's just it's sort of
open to see the drop.
When are we going to fix the roads
report.
downtown? Seems like
There would be a roads discussion
Josh, you have a question.
tonight.
So I'm looking at this, and I just want us to not lose sight of how devastating last fall was when we had Ida, and I just feel that the having the $250,000 for flooding, which will change what we use it for, is going to need to be part of our budget discipline for the foreseeable future. I mean, probably for the next 10 years. These are massive undertakings. We've spent the money this year very responsibly, and whether there's different ways to skin the cat, I think what Carolina is saying, and I think what everyone is feeling, is this is a major commitment that all of us have made and our community wants. So again, whether there's a better way to do it is something to be discussed, but I think it's a very important value. On the roads, my understanding, and I'll just turn it over because I just want to understand, my understanding was that we're making up for not investing enough in the past, and that we're truing up our budget to be able to maintain the roads the way we should be maintaining them on an annual basis. But that's just that's so high level, and I leave it to you, Greg, to explain it. But that's just, I think, where we're talking about these 2 points. One is to make us honest with roads, and the other is the threat that's ahead of us.
anyways, we don't have to decide any of this stuff tonight, right? This is-
No, but we
we're
should continue this discussion as part of the budget workshops. The budget workshops appear to have agendas that don't allow for this kind of.
You can tack it on to the end of the
Yeah,
second
maybe that's
session.
a good way to
after
do
you've
it.
heard everything.
Let's
Yeah.
make sure that we do.